In the last episode, Lu Sheng ruthlessly took down two of the top members of the Dark Demon Society. However, an even stronger member closed in on him before he could catch his breath. The two squared off, and while the woman put up a decent fight, she wasn't as strong as our boy expected. Being merely a top-tier great grand master means she barely made her worth his time. Picking up where we left off, an overwhelming, terrifying energy burst from Lu Sheng. The woman's eyes widened in horror as she watched him raising his hand, unleashing a wave of intense psychic power towards her. It wrapped around her neck like an iron grip, hoisting her off the ground. She trembled mid-air, struggling like a helpless chick. Panic turned to despair as she realized just how powerful Lu Sheng really was. And with absolutely zero sympathy, and of course in the name of equality, our boy was about to give her the same treatment as if it was anyone else. With that, he then tells her it is time to say goodbye. Who knows? Maybe she'd get lucky after. Followed by a faint smirk, he wondered. Perhaps she'd get reincarnated somewhere nice. Not that she could understand a word he was saying. It hardly mattered. With a final blast, the woman was gone. Lu Sheng didn't know her rank within the Dark Demon Society, but let's be honest, nor did he care anyway. After wrapping things up, he contacted the nearby military district, reported his location, and ordered them to come clean up the mess. Then, without a second thought, he took off to his next destination. This battle had given him a clearer sense of his current strength. With the boost from his 7 immortal cells and all of his techniques, his combat power should be around 70 to 80 stars. But if he went all out, he might hit 100 stars. Yet even at 100 stars, he wasn't entirely sure just how close was to a true martial saint. It's clear he's constantly growing stronger, having only just reached the 8th level not long ago. Though his physical strength was off the charts and the immortal cells gave him an edge, he hadn't yet started fusing his spirit, body, and mind, which caused him to realize that there was still a long road ahead. The cool night breeze brushed against his face, bringing a rare moment of calm. Though he still felt he wasn't strong enough, maybe he's been pushing himself too hard lately. While he was lost in thought, elsewhere in town, we find ourselves inside Lian Su's lavish mansion. Her furious voice echoed through the halls as she ranted over a failed assassination attempt. She was practically screaming at the screen, where she fumed over all the things she's done and the risks she'd taken to even make a deal with them. And now they had the audacity to tell her that they failed. On the other end of the line was a man with a calm voice, trying to soothe her. He explained that no one had anticipated this outcome and even expressed regret, adding that they had also suffered significant losses, with 4 of their powerful demons killed. Lian Su was momentarily shocked, but brushed it off, telling him that was not her problem. Gripping the screen, she gritted her teeth and said that given such heavy losses, they should be even more determined to kill that brat. She didn't believe that the mighty Dark Demon Society couldn't even handle a mere 8th-level kid. The man responded that they could handle the job easily. That's if any one of their top 3 demons gets involved. Lian Su, now visibly irritated, snapped at him saying if that's the case, then get on with it. But the man replied calmly saying that was fine and they could proceed with her request, but it would cost her 20 times the original price. Stunned, she demanded to know if he was serious. The man continued, explaining that deploying one of their top demons to her country would disrupt international balance and could even attract the attention of her country's 3 martial saints. The repercussions were too complex to detail, and after all, they weren't just a for-hire assassination group. Assisting her was more a favor to the influential person backing her, and it wasn't something they'd typically agree to so easily. Listening to all this, Lian Su threw her tablet to the floor in rage, cursing them all as selfish bastards. Unbothered, the man added calmly that she still needed to cover their losses from the failed mission, and would find the compensation details in her inbox within a few days. Lian Su seethed even more, cursing them for failing at their job and then expecting her to pay for it. This was supposed to be a world-class organization. In a fit of rage, she stomped her tablet to pieces, as if smashing it was the same as smashing the man's face. "Bastards, every last one of you," she muttered, over and over. Eventually, though, she forced herself to calm down, knowing she'd already pushed her martial saint husband to his limit with all her recent schemes. Her last attempt to take out Lu Sheng's family had backfired spectacularly. Not only did she get one of the Jidao people killed, but Lu Sheng ended up joining the military shortly after, forcing her husband to make concessions because of it. She slumped onto her bed, utterly drained, as though all her strength had been sucked away. Her husband, the Jidao martial saint, had already warned her to drop this vendetta, but she couldn't let it go. Lu Sheng was supposed to be a nobody, yet he'd humiliated her time and again. Tears of frustration rolled down her cheeks as she cursed him until she finally fell asleep. Outside her room, the maids exchanged relieved glances. They'd seen her like this for days now, throwing fits until she exhausted herself. One went to prepare food, just in case she woke up hungry. Late into the night, the moon cast a pale glow across the sky. Suddenly, a low voice echoed, calling, "Lian Su, my sister." Lian Su awoke to the sound, rubbing her eyes as she sat up. But before she stood a horrifying sight. A man, covered head to toe in blood, slowly approaching her. She recognized him immediately. It was Lian Jibei, her dead brother. He stared at her, asking if she understood how terrible his death had been. Her face went pale, and she frantically backed away. But then, his body began to split apart, blood seeping from his gaping wounds. She froze, unable to process the horror, and then screamed in terror. Jerking awake with a gasp, Lian Su found herself in bed, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding wildly. She looked around her familiar room, gradually calming herself. Just a nightmare, she reassured herself. Why would she dream of Lian Jibei? Was it her obsession with revenge? Or was it something else? Maybe her constant failures had summoned him back from the dead to confront her. She quickly brushed these thoughts away and called out for water. A maid entered moments later, bringing a glass. Lian Su took a sip, but nearly gagged. The water tasted awful. Under the moonlight, she glanced down and froze in horror. The liquid was bright red, and a single floating eyeball bobbed up and down. She screamed, hurling the glass across the room. But then, another figure, none other than her nephew with an empty eye socket, lunged at her from the shadows. Lian Su shrieked again, her eyes rolling back as she collapsed, unconscious, only to wake up shortly after. Outside, Lu Sheng watched it all, calmly observing the scene from just beyond her bedroom window. He chuckled to himself. Using this technique on a mere 6th-level martial artist whose mind was already on edge was almost too easy. In an endless loop of nightmares, driven to the brink of mental collapse by fear and despair is quite twisted if you ask me, but it's also a subtle and merciless way to make Lian Su suffer without granting her a swift death. Either way, Lu Sheng felt no pity for this woman, who had not only targeted him multiple times, but had dared to go after his family. Watching her body twitch and writhe on the bed, he smirked, wondering briefly if he was being too cruel, but he quickly dismissed the thought. He knew he wasn't any saint, just an ordinary guy taking justice into his own hands. So, he stood quietly by her bedside, observing her suffering. But suddenly, he sensed danger, as if someone's intense gaze fixed on him. His immortal cells fired off a strong warning, causing him to think it had to be a martial saint. The immortal cells allowed him to sense impending threats to himself or his loved ones, and he guessed martial saints might possess similar abilities. Realizing he had to change his plans, he extended his hand and ended Lian Su's suffering with a final touch. The warning pressure immediately faded, and he left without another glance. A short while later, maids arrived with water for her bedside. The lead maid whispered for the others to be quiet, and they tiptoed to the door, peeking inside. What they saw made them scream in horror. "Oh no, madam! Madam is dead!" Meanwhile, across the city in a grand estate, a lively banquet filled the brightly lit manor. Guests flowed in, including several grandmasters. 2 young women marveled at the scene, saying they couldn't believe people of such high status were here for Mr. Chen's birthday. It was clear he had serious influence. One friend nodded, adding that Mr. Chen was a grandmaster himself, with connections to all kinds of big names, even a couple of friends in the military who were at the 8th level. The young woman's eyes widened in awe. Meeting an 8th-level great-grandmaster was unheard of for them, and they whispered excitedly about the chance to catch the attention of a big shot tonight. Ling Su lingered alone by the entrance, listening to the chatter around her. She looked at these so-called elites of society, feeling utterly bored by it all. Just then, a man approached her, offering his hand and suggesting she might be feeling overwhelmed because it was her first event like this, assuring her she'd get used to it. He offered to escort her inside. She politely declined, explaining she was waiting for a friend. He didn't take offense, just looked a bit surprised, remarking that he hadn't known she had a friend here in the capital and would love to meet them later. With that, he headed inside. leaving her with a small sigh of relief. Since her arrival at the Chen family estate, they'd all treated her quite well, especially this man, Chen Yi, who was technically her cousin and seemed to go out of his way to look out for her. Still, she couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Her thoughts trailed off as a voice behind her interrupted, asking if she thought he was up to no good, perhaps with some ulterior motive. Instinctively, she nodded, saying that's exactly what she'd been thinking. Then, realizing the voice was familiar, she turned around, surprised, to see Lu Sheng approaching with a gentle smile. She blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected him to actually show up. Lu Sheng chuckled, saying he'd promised to come, so of course he'd follow through. Glancing around, he took in their surroundings and thought to himself that it was about 1,000 kilometers from Lian Su's mansion to the Chen family estate, a distance he'd covered in just 5 minutes. Ling Su looked at him, half exasperated, insisting he really didn't need to show up as her backup and that there was no dramatic, novel-worthy plot unfolding here. As far as she could tell, the Chen family had been welcoming, and even if they felt a bit distant, they seemed genuine in their attempts to make her feel at home. Lu Sheng cut her off with a calm reminder, saying it was her wealth, not her, that they were welcoming. She let out a sigh, knowing he was right. Lowering her head, looking a bit downcast, she muttered, "Coming back, it always has a cost, doesn't it?" Watching Ling Su, Lu Sheng was a bit surprised. With her personality, he'd expected her to push back against the family's pretenses, not settle into them so easily. It was clear he still had a lot to learn about her, but as he thought it over, he began to understand what might be on her mind. She had grown up without much family love. Perhaps in her own way, she longed for even a hint of family warmth, even if it was fake. Though he understood her longing, it didn't mean he agreed with it. Looking at her, he smiled and said, "It doesn't really matter. Tonight, I'll make the right choice for you." Ling Su blinked in confusion, asking what he meant by that. Lu Sheng didn't answer directly. Instead, he glanced at the people milling around, muttering something about finding an unlucky target. Ling Su stared at him, clueless about his plan for the night. Suddenly, Lu Sheng pointed to someone and asked, "Who's that guy?" He was indicating a young man who had just stepped out of a sleek car, a beautiful woman on each arm. The people around instantly recognized him, bowing and greeting him with deep respect, though he barely noticed. She explained that he was the second son of the Zhou family, a powerful clan on the outskirts of the capital with more influence than her own Chen family. Her opinion of him wasn't high. She dismissed him as nothing more than a rich playboy, adding that his older brother was the one people really knew. Before she could continue, Lu Sheng smirked, pointing out that she'd just said her Chen family. Ling Su paused, realizing that unconsciously, she'd already begun to see herself as part of the Chen family. Lu Sheng took her hand gently, smiling at her with a warmth that made her blush. He didn't want her getting tied down by things that would hold her back from becoming stronger, and tonight, he was here to set things right for her. Before she could process his words, Lu Sheng was already striding toward the Zhou family's second son. People crowded around the young man, each eager to introduce themselves, practically begging for a moment of his attention. Growing impatient, he told them all to get lost. Just as he thought he'd cleared the crowd, he looked up to see a tall, imposing figure blocking his path. A young man with a cool, unflinching gaze. The young man looked Lu Sheng up and down, noting his impressive build and sharp looks. But what struck him most was the pressure radiating from Lu Sheng's aura, which made it hard for him to even breathe. Instinctively, he pulled the two women closer, using them as shields, and demanded to know who Lu Sheng was. Lu Sheng glanced at the flashy sports car parked behind him, and asked if it was his. The young man nodded, smirking, and replied, "And what if it is?" Lu Sheng nodded, while acting super impressed, said it was a nice car, but wanted to know just how much it set him back. Realizing this was about status, the young man chuckled, pride taking over as he said, "This baby cost him over 80 million and it's a limited edition. Probably the only one in the country." Lu Sheng acted even more impressed, walking over to run his hand over the car's sleek surface. The young man scoffed, muttering something about country bumpkins, but in the next second, Lu Sheng's tone turned cold. "Nice car, but..." Before anyone could react, an overwhelming force radiated from Lu Sheng. In an instant, the car was flattened, crushed under his aura like a tin can. The young man froze and then let out a horrified scream. "My car!" Lu Sheng stuffed his hands into his pockets, giving the young man a satisfied smile while saying, "That's much better." The young man, his face twisted with rage and fear, glared at him. "Hey, bro, what's this all about?" Lu Sheng shot him a sharp look, the chilling energy rolling off him making the young man stumble back in panic. It was then that he learned about Lu Sheng's name, who's also a friend of someone named He Ling Su. Lu Sheng told him that if he had any problems, he could come find him anytime. As if obviously looking for drama, he then pointed to the crowd where Ling Su stood and said, "That's the person he's talking about." Everyone turned to look at her. Meanwhile, He Ling Su herself was completely confused, and pointed to herself, wondering why she was suddenly the center of attention.